In life, it's so easy to get caught up thinking about what we don't have. Hair, skills, abilities, anything to offer at all, and yet God doesn't seem too concerned about that. Like, we worry all the time about, oh man, what's it gonna take to solve this problem? And God's like, what do you got? I can change the world with that. Some of us are sitting in here this morning feeling dry. Just feeling kind of stuck. We believe and we love God, but our faith is kind of going nowhere and doing nothing. And we're going through the motions and we're doing the stuff. But then we read like the book of Acts and we're like, man, those stories are so cool. Like, I wish that I could just once in my life see some of the stuff that they saw. See thousands of people come to Jesus and baptisms and healings and like, wow. But my faith looks nothing like that at all. There's no electricity to it. And I don't know how I can kickstart this thing and move and become part of what God's doing in the world. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. And we're going to do that by looking at the story of a guy who went from being a failure to being such an incredible leader that he spoke and lived so much like Jesus. It's almost unbelievable. And his name is Peter. And it's the Peter, the Apostle Peter, the guy that Jesus put in charge of his ecclesia at the very beginning. And we're going to pick up his story in the book of Acts chapter 9. And so if you have a Bible with you can crack it open to Acts 9. If you don't have one, you can follow along on the screen. And if you need a Bible, or your kids do, we have a whole bunch of them with reading plans back in the Next Steps area. Please snag one before you leave today. But as you're turning your Bibles there, quick observation. We talked a lot about Peter at the beginning of this series. Like, he was the original catalyst for the explosion of the church in Jerusalem, but he has been AWOL for a while. The movement's been moving, but it's been going through the efforts of other people. In fact, the last time we read about Peter was at the beginning of Acts chapter 6, when him and the rest of the disciples decided it would not be good for us to spend time waiting on tables for widows. We got to lead and we got to pray. And since then, we've heard about some stuff that was happening in the church and some people crashing into Jesus. It's just the disciples haven't done a lot of that stuff. Like, the movement's been moving, but what Luke tells us is the apostles have been staying in Jerusalem. And then in chapter 9, something changed. And Peter once again caused explosive growth and helped a lot of people crash into Jesus, mostly by following in the footsteps of Jesus. And I love that we get to dig into this story on Palm Sunday. Like, as Jeremy said, today's Palm Sunday, and we sang that song about Hosanna, because next week is Easter, so this week is the week that we celebrate the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, where he rode into the city on a donkey, and people shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest heaven. And they waved palm branches and put him in the road in front of him. And I want to take a quick aside and talk about Palm Sunday really quick before we get back to Peter in Acts 9, because I think there's a beautiful connection between the two. So Palm Sunday, when the people said Hosanna to the Son of David, they were declaring very definitively, Jesus, we believe that you are the promised Messiah, the one God said is going to come set all things right and make all things new. You're the king. And so immediately the issue was forced for all of the political and religious authorities in the city of Jerusalem. They had to do something with Jesus now. They had to either kill him or crown him, because the crowds thought that he was the king. And that's what it means that they're calling out Hosanna. It's a really fascinating word. In the Old Testament, it's this compound Hebrew word, Hoshiah-na. It was a cry for help. It meant, oh God, please save. Oh God, please help me. Hoshiah-na, that's how it's used in the Psalms. But by the time of Jesus in the first century, as it had gotten transliterated into Greek, Hosanna, it was more like a defiant declaration, God will help. God will save. And so as Jesus is rolling in, they're like, Hosanna, Hosanna. They're like, you're the one who's going to help. You're the one who's going to save. And that's why they're waving palm branches. That was a declaration that they believed the promised one would bring in such flourishing that the prophecy in Isaiah 55 would come true and the trees would clap their hands. Like, that's why palm branches were being cut and waved and laid before them. They're like, Jesus is going to be the one who sets everything right. And it's like a pretty amazing moment. It had to be electric. You can just imagine the energy of the crowd and the thoughts of Jesus' disciples. They're like, hey, this is finally happening the way we thought it would be happening. And everyone's really excited. But the problem is they didn't have it quite right. They had a lot of things right. They were right that Jesus was the promised one. They were right that he was going to save. They were right that eventually he'd make all things new and set all things right again. But they were wrong about what exactly he was doing and how he was going to make that happen. Because see, they thought he was going to be a conquering king who overthrew the Roman Empire and set up a new kingdom for Israel where they would have a lot of power and a lot of position and a lot of prosperity. But the problem is, on Palm Sunday, Jesus didn't enter the city like a conquering king, like on a noble steed. He rode in on a donkey. And despite Princess Fiona's confusion, donkey does not equal steed. All right, if you rode into war on a donkey, you would be more likely to die than if you just walked in on foot. They are not war horses. All right, in the first century, they were actually the choice of servants. A servant would ride a donkey, and for some reason, that's what Jesus chose to ride into Jerusalem on. Because he wasn't the conquering king that they thought he would be. He was a whole different kind of king. He was, as Zechariah 9 prophesied, a humble king. Behold, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey. Jesus was the gentle king who became the suffering king and the self-sacrificial king. Come not to liberate Israel from the Romans, but humanity from our sin through his death. Like that's what Jesus was all about on Palm Sunday. And in Acts 9, what we find is Peter, who had been staying still and not really moving anywhere in Jerusalem, once again deciding that he needed to go out in humility and risk his life. Because make no mistake, the political and religious leaders were still desperately trying to hunt down and kill anyone who claimed to preach the name of Jesus. In Acts 9, we find Peter deciding, it doesn't matter that they're trying to kill me. I need to go out, and I need to leverage myself for the sake of the people around me. And it's as he did that that we meet him once again center stage in the movement and the explosion of the ecclesia. And this is what we read in Acts chapter 9, verse 32. It says, as Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. And this is the first time Peter has moved with the movement. In Acts 1, Jesus gave his disciples a 4-stage plan for the church to grow. He said, we're going to start in Jerusalem, then we're going to move to Judea, and then Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth. And Luke tells us really specifically that because of persecution, the ecclesia had moved from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and had begun moving toward the ends of the earth. But Peter hadn't been a part of any of that. And even though in English those words, as Peter traveled, makes it seem like he'd been doing that, the Greek is this idiomatic phrase that means this is brand new for him. He's finally doing what everyone else had been doing and moving with the movement, specifically from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria, because Lydda is like 25 miles north of Jerusalem. And the crazy thing is, as he went and did that, he crashed into a whole lot of people who needed what he had to offer, and he was able, in the name of Jesus, to serve them and point them toward him. In verse 33, we read, there he found a man named Aeneas, who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and roll up your mat. Immediately Aeneas got up. All those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. All right, this story is almost the exact same story as Jesus healing a guy who had been paralyzed for 38 years, telling him, get up, roll up your mat, and walk. In fact, the two stories are so similar that it's probably not a coincidence. And the Hebrews, by the way, do not have a word for coincidence. Like in ancient Hebrew, it's just not a thing, because in their minds, in Peter's mind, coincidence doesn't exist. It's simply God working behind the curtain of the world in ways we don't see until all of a sudden, like, bam, and you're like, wow, that was nuts. And God's like, nuts. Oh, you call it that if you want. It's not that. It is exactly the way I orchestrated it to be. And so Peter, in this moment, he leaves Jerusalem and he starts living on mission. And what we find him doing is talking like Jesus and healing like Jesus. It's almost as if the more he moved on mission with Jesus, the more like Jesus he became. And we see that even more profoundly in what happens next. This is one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. It says, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged, please come at once. And Peter went with them. And when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. And this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. All right, first things first, Dorcas is an unfortunate name. I know some of you are big into giving your kids Bible names. Don't do that one. That's not good parenting. Like, it's just... And the worst part is, in Greek, it means gazelle. Apropos of nothing, at some point in human history, a Greek person looked at that majestic, beautiful creature and was like, it looked like a Dorcas to me. It's like... Anyway, we don't know a lot about Dorcas other than that's her name, but what we do know is that apparently she was so awesome that when she died, the church looked at her lifeless body and said, nope, this is not going to work for us at all. Don't bury her, don't embalm her, throw her upstairs. We'll go get Peter, see if he can't come by and make her alive again. And it must have been such a serious thing that, like, Peter actually came, even though raising people from the dead was not on his job description. Like, he had never done that before. Only Jesus had raised people from the dead. And it's like a 12-mile walk from Lydda to Joppa. And this week I was trying to put myself in Peter's sandals, thinking what would be going through your mind as you went on that long walk? You'd be like, what am I doing? Lord, you're going to have to help a brother out. It feels like they're going to be really upset if I can't bring her back from the dead. But I don't bring people back from the dead. I don't even know how to bring people back from the dead. You got to be kidding me. Like, what is going on? But what is your problem now? He just goes. And she's so amazing that they expected that he would come and try to do that. So you think, oh man, she must have been an incredible leader, like an irreplaceable communicator, a great messenger of the gospel. She was an underwear maker. Literally the only thing we read about Dorcas, the only significant contribution the Bible records her making to the church, was that she knit underwear for widows. The Greek word there is chiton. It means negligee. They wore underwear a little bit differently than we wear them, but it's like the undergarment. I think that's why Peter kicked everybody out of the room. Like, it literally says in Acts 9 that the widows were showing them the garments that Dorcas had made, but widows were poor. They didn't have extras. It wasn't like, here, look. It was like, look what she knit me. And Peter's like, I'm trying to do a miracle here. You got to get these grandma underwears out of my face. Go. Ha. But I read the story, and I'm like, how easy would it have been for Dorcas to just be like, I'm an old lady with history's most unfortunate name. What do I have to give? Like, how could I contribute? I'm just gonna shrink back. I got nothing. I'm just gonna sit here. But instead, she came and she's like, hey, how can I make a difference for the church? And someone's like, well, we can't have naked widows. And she's like, I got it. And I don't know that I would have done it. Like, I get hung up all the time on my lack of ability. I spend so much more time thinking about what I can't do and what I don't have than I do looking for ways to use what I do have to make a difference. And it's difficult because our world constantly reminds us of our shortcomings, even when we don't see it coming. I caught sniper fire this week. I was walking through my living room, and my kids were watching Despicable Me 3, and I remembered taking them to the theater to watch it. And there's a moment in the movie where Gru's brother looks at him, and he's like, how could you have gotten such a pretty wife? You don't even have any hair. And in the middle of the theater, my daughter, who must have been like 4 or 5 at the time, shouted out, my dad doesn't have any hair, and he has a wife? And then people are looking. What do? You just wave. You're like, kids are the best. Well, like in life, it's so easy to get caught up thinking about what we don't have. Hair, skills, abilities, anything to offer at all. And yet, like, God doesn't seem too concerned about that. Like, we worry all the time about, oh man, what's it going to take to solve this problem? And God's like, what do you got? I can change the world with that. And Dorcas believed that, and she stepped into that mission in a way that was so powerful